Good morning, everybody.
Made it another week.
Yay.
Here we
So
are.
fabulous to see everybody. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful, warm, sunny, balmy New England February day.
Too bad my bathing suit is already packed away.
Yeah. Well, it's cold outside, but it's warm inside. So it's so good to see everybody. Let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together, and then we'll get right into it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torah. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So first of all, good morning, and I wanted to begin by just getting some feedback for those. Many of you were going to be on the call last Tuesday, our cast dialogues, and I wanted to just hear from folks if they wanted to share some feedback about how that first session went. Would love to hear anyone who wanted to share. So raise your hand or let me know in the chat. Linda Leffert.
I think the young man who prepared the questions
Yes.
did something, was really a good way to start.
Yes.
And get people thinking about those things. It shows he really prepared. So I thought that was great. I was wondering how it would open. Unfortunately, the only person of color in our group was the leader.
Right.
There were no other members of the congregation. So I would be very interested in knowing if any of the other groups did have some members of the church and, you know, their thoughts.
Yeah, so I would say, Linda, that is an almost universal reaction from the Temple Emmanuel folks, just universal, which is where are the Black people in our group? And when you look on the screen, it's supposed to be a dialogue with the church and the synagogue and white and Black, and most of the faces are white. And that's true. I think there is something like 30 members of the church plus 15 facilitators. And then we have something like 15 or 16 breakout rooms. And as Jeremy says, number one, they're a much smaller church. They have about 150 people in their church. We have about 4,000 people in our church. They have 150 people. And also, as he points out, they're a minority. And also, as he points out, it was a hard sell. It was not like, and he shared this at the opening, it was not like the folks at the church said, oh, yes, we would love to be in dialogue with the rich white synagogue in Newton. That was not what they thought. He had to really work on getting them to come to the dialogue. So it is absolutely the case that most of every breakout room will be mostly white, but there will be one Black co-facilitator for every group. That we were very mindful to do. Let me just ask one last question, Linda. Aside from the asymmetry that you talked about, what did you learn from the questions that Ferris, Chavis had prepared and shared? Did you learn anything about yourself?
Not a whole lot. Because of all the time we've spent reading this and other books this season, we've already discussed most of the issues that clearly were raised by his questions. And I said in my particular breakout group, the only one, and then there were other people who said the same, that the only discrimination I ever personally felt was on the basis of sex. And that was true in college, and it was less so in law school, where I went to Northeastern, and very much the case in my working life after college and as a lawyer.
Okay.
So that was the only of the others. But I also thought it was interesting that a number of the people who said that, you know, the fact that a number of the white people in our group, you know, they didn't all routinely say their parents thought they could do anything. They could accomplish anything.
Mm.
So other than that, I don't have anything specific to add.
Thank you, Linda. Other reactions or feedback from those? Lynette Politan.
Well, of course, I too thought
I'm eating.
I
these
know you are.
questions.
You can't.
Lynette, could you
Okay.
speak? If everyone who's not on could put yourself on mute, and then Lynette, if you could start again, you're right now muted. If you can unmute Lynette and then start
Got
again.
it.
Thank you.
Okay, so of course, I agree. The questions that we're talking about for those people who were not on were very extremely revealing, not just about how we think about ourselves and Black people, but honestly, and to explain at the end of the questions that we answered, there was a score. And during the breakout group, each one of us had to articulate our score. And for me, it was also interesting to understand some of my co-congregants here and where they came from, which you had mentioned, Linda. So I think it would be so inspiring to send those questions out, or maybe just a few of them as a teaser, so to speak, to our congregation to have more people either become involved in the project or to simply begin thinking about how we think and how we assume or what we assume about other people.
Mm.
It was, the amount of time you guys put in was totally clear and amazing in terms of organization and thought. Excellent.
Well, thank you, Lynette. I'll just take a couple more comments and then we'll segue into our content today. Peter, I think your hand was up, and then Marilyn. Peter, if you can, please unmute.
I guess it's Annette that's
Oh,
going to speak.
Annette, okay.
Oh, both of
So-
us.
Sorry, we've had computer problems, so what you see is Jayla, our granddaughter's name. In our group, we had 2 Black people, including Jeremy's wife. And what happened is we just began, she started talking and telling about her background. And that it was fascinating. And then a couple of members of the temple spoke and shared experiences in their families about when there were issues around Black members of the family and what the reaction would be to grandchildren or great nieces and nephews. And then the other Black woman in the group spoke, and she was from Cambridge and talked about her experiences. So we had some, but we were barely started. And I think that was the frustration because people spoke for a few minutes. I found the questions fascinating because it made me think about times in my life that some of which I hadn't thought about when the question became pertinent, and it raised that for me.
What's an example of that, Annette?
You know what? I don't remember the questions right now.
Right. Okay.
Well, I think some of them had to do with, I can't answer. I'm sorry, I just can't pull on it.
Yeah. Okay.
But by the way, Jeremy's wife's life, do you know it, Wes, her background?
No, I don't really know her background.
Okay, she grew up in, I think it was Houston, in a primarily white neighborhood, went to private school, which began to speak to why this, for me, we didn't talk about it. And I'm wondering the impact on their moving from Cambridge, as Peter and I have, to Newton, in terms of their daughter, and their children in terms of schools and things. So it was, all that happened in ours was that people got issues out. We didn't talk about them.
Right. One of the, right, the two primary pieces of feedback we got was not enough Blacks in the breakout room, too white, and too short. There wasn't enough time. And then both of those pieces of feedback are absolutely true. We can't really tweak the first one. That is what it is. The second one, we're going to try to adjust the schedule so that there's much more time in the breakout room for dialogue, because that's really the heart of the matter. We'll just take a couple last comments and then get into it. Marilyn, Kalis, and then John, I think I saw your hand.
Mine, I don't know whether this came at the end of the breakout session or at the end of the whole session, but I particularly would like to get a copy of the questions, because I think that this is a great way to have a family conversation with our children who would answer those questions and then discuss them with grandchildren. I think that's a way to boost their awareness of this issue.
I love it. By the way, guess what holiday's coming up that's perfect for that? Passover. You know, I think that these questions would be perfect for Passover. We had 3 African Americans in our breakout group. And one of the, and including one of the facilitators. And she pointed out some real poignancy, deep poignancy to the question that really got me, which I didn't, when I heard the question, this one really was very emotional for me, which was, did your parents ever tell you basically that you were beautiful and talented and that you could accomplish anything that you want?
Yeah.
And I just thought that was such a telling question. And then I thought to myself, why would a parent not ever tell their kid that? I mean, who would that not apply to? That's just so basic to parenthood. And she said that many African-American families have the experience that they don't hear that when they're kids, not because the parents don't love them and not because the parents don't believe in them, but because the parents are working 2 or 3 jobs and they're so focused on just putting bread on the table and getting through the day, they just don't have leftover energy for that kind of positive reinforcement.
Feedback.
And that was what our co-leader said. So, right, a lot of these questions are super evocative for your Passover table. John, we'll take one last feedback, one last piece of feedback, and then we'll get into our content.
Just very briefly, I think the major problem was the time factor in the small group. We never got through introductions, let alone being able to discuss any of the questions or anything else. So I would recommend at least an hour in the breakout groups if anything is going to happen between the participants.
Yeah, you're 100% right, John. And we are going to tweak this for next time for March 9th, which I'm leading. I think you guys sent, I sent you, I hope you received it on Friday, the lesson plan, which came from the story that Andrea Waldstein had pointed out last Tuesday, the MAGA plumber story at the end. It's short and evocative, 3 questions, and we're gonna just, and I sent it out early so that I'm hoping to get like at least 45 minutes in the breakout room, which would be a lot more than we had this past time. So, okay, so here is, I wanted to just kind of name the central problem from this reading, and in many ways it's the central problem of our country as follows. And it's also amazing, I just want to say, how the Torah reading tracks this. Literally, the weekly Torah reading, again, tracks this. And I don't know how it happens that way, but it does. The issue is as follows. She points out in a lot of the heart of the book that upper caste people just hate it when lower caste people start to emerge. And the reason they just hate it is that upper caste people, it's important to them emotionally that there's somebody lower than them, that they are more than somebody else. They're more than the person that's lower than them. And that it's a deeply rooted emotional thing, right? And that's just a through line throughout the whole book, from the principal of the school in the South who said to the Black girl, "You're not from here because you're looking me in the eyes." And most kids from here know not to look at me in the eyes. And there's this whole basic idea that lower caste people should stay in their lower caste so that upper caste people can feel better about themselves, that they're up above the lower caste people. And there's any number of examples. That's basically the heart of the middle of the book. And one of the members of our class, Paul Greenberg, had sent me a related video from Dan Ariely, who is an Israeli thought leader. And the question that he poses is, why is it that very often people will vote against their own economic interest? And his example is minimum wage. Like, why is it that a lot of poor white people are against increasing the minimum wage? And Dan Ariely anchors the learning, and there's studies and charts and graphs to show this, that I would rather make less so long as I'm making more than you than make more if you're going to get up there too. I would rather make less if I'm making more than you than make more if you get up there too. That is, that there's this deeply rooted psychological need to be more than, and that and as a result of keeping people down, then the whole not only do the lower caste people suffer, but the upper caste people suffer too. So I want to just pivot for a second. This is a very Temple Emmanuel thing, and this is truly a grain of sand that reveals the universe. But Jews get this from the 6 million. And I just have 2 words for you to get the power of this. The 2 words are Larry Bacow, right? Larry Bacow is the president of Harvard. After this distinguished career, he was the president of Tufts. He was the chancellor of MIT. He's one of the great leaders in education. And his mother, Ruth Bacow, may she rest in peace, survived Auschwitz. And she was the only person from her German village who survived the Holocaust. So she's the only person from her village who survived the Holocaust. She's one of the few Jews who survived Auschwitz. And she was able to survive and come to America and to affirm life. And her son is the president of Harvard. And the question is, how many other presidents of Harvard, and how many physicists, and how many composers, and how many poets, and how many dreamers, and how many technology, and what kind of contribution, if that's just one grain of sand, if the 6 million hadn't been murdered, and their descendants had a chance to be born, and their descendants of the descendants, what kind of a world would we have, right? But everyone is worse off because of that loss. And so too, you know, she makes a comparable point, obviously not, you know, in our own American context. She talks about the great Satchel Page, who was perhaps the greatest pitcher in the history of baseball, who never really got a chance to play Major League Baseball. I mean, he was taken out as a carnival attraction a few times when he was well past his prime, when he was in his 40s, when he was in his 50s. But when he really was in his prime, he couldn't pitch. And she asked, how impoverished is baseball because of that? So here's the question that I want to tee up, which is, it feels like, and then one last thing, and then we'll look at our text and invite some comment. It feels like if America could allow the lower caste folks to arise, then everyone is the winner. Everyone makes up, you know, the lower caste people do better, obviously, but the upper caste people do better too, because you just have the flourishing of all this talent, which lifts everybody up. And as a result of lowering the lower caste people and not letting them get up, then everyone suffers. And I will, and then just one comment on this, which was very, to me, very fascinating. Shira and I are listening to President Obama's book, A Promised Land, and the story of how this Black man became president of the United States. And he tells the story that in 2008, when he was running, a lot of Black people did not want him to run. They thought he was like the Greek character who was going to fly too close to the sun. That's you know, his formulation. They thought he might get assassinated, and they thought there was no chance to win. And they thought that he should just talk about that he was really kind of an attraction with no real chance to win. And therefore, he should heighten awareness and just talk about Black issues. And President Obama, then Kennedy Obama, said, no, I'm in this to win this. And I'm not going to just focus on Black issues like police brutality, etc. I'm going to focus on American issues, because if we can figure out how to get Blacks out, we'll be able to figure out how to get everyone out. And if we can lift up the fortune of Blacks, we can lift up the fortune of all Americans, that we're all in this together. And that was the animating impulse of his campaign, was I don't have to talk about just Blacks for Blacks to do well. I have to talk about all Americans for Blacks and all Americans to do well. And that's the new kind of politics that he talked about. And my question for you is, why does that always fail? Why does that always fail? It's like true. It's true, but it always was like, he won on the basis of that, right? I don't have to talk about Blacks to talk about Blacks. I can talk about all Americans to talk about Blacks and all Americans. And that's obviously true. And her book points this out. And you think about Larry Bacco, and you think about the 6 million and all, how the world would be so much better off. And yet no sooner does he win than the Tea Party comes out, which is a party of white resentment and white grievance, et cetera, et cetera. So why is it that the obvious truth that we're all in this together and we all rise together, we all fall together, why does that not become broadly accepted policy? So that's the question. And what I want to show you today is how exactly this issue is teed up in our Torah reading starting this week. Okay, so we'll pivot to the Torah in a minute, but let me just first invite any thoughts and comments before we look at the Torah reading that also makes this point. Anyone want to offer any preliminary thoughts before we get to the text? So let me just see. Paul Kalis.
Yes. Sadly, the Black experience has shown that if you bring in people, let's say they're at a lower caste.
Yeah.
For example, Guatemalans, Hondurans, Salvadorans, Mexicans. They came in and they worked for terrible jobs, but they worked for less. They worked for less than everyone. So the Blacks are the ones who suffered the most by these people coming in. I'm not saying I agree, I'm just telling you what I think happened. And as a result, they put up a barrier to have more immigrants come in.
Okay. Not sure where to go with that.
Well, but I think that was the reality.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I suppose where to go with that is it's always going to be a question about how does a nation of immigrants continue to welcome immigrants? And what's the moral obligation of immigrants and their descendants, namely 100% of us? Because 100% of us were not on the Mayflower. 100% of us had, parents, grandparents, or great-grandparents that came from a graveyard called Europe, Western Europe or Eastern Europe, and they found America and freedom. And so we're, sitting pretty in 02459. And what kind of moral obligation does that impose on us to keep the promise of American freedom alive for other peoples versus saying, well, we're good, we're safe, and now we're going to close it up? And I think that's an open question. Okay, I want to take a look at the Torah in, we're pivoting in our reading to the second half of the book of Exodus, right? So we had the Exodus, we had the splitting of the sea, and then we had the big laws at Sinai and the small laws of Mishpatim. And now in the second half of the book of Exodus, which is Teruma, Tetzaveh, Kitisa, Vayakel, and Pekude, there are two basic, the structure is Teruma, Tetzaveh is giving instructions to build this tabernacle. Vayakel, Pekude is actually building the tabernacle. So instructions to build, and then the actual building of this wilderness tabernacle. And then in the middle is the sin of the golden calf. And I want to offer you a reading of these familiar texts, which is very simple and very cast. You have two building projects, therefore. You have the building of the tabernacle, and you have the building of the golden calf, two building projects. And in one case, you will see that half of the people are included and half are excluded. That is to say, in the building of the golden calf, only men are involved and women are not involved. And you'll see that. And as a result of the excluding of half the population, you have a very adverse reaction and a very bad result. The contrast with the building of the tabernacle is so clear. And what's also clear is the literary artistry of the Torah, because the word all or everyone, everybody, kol in Hebrew, is repeated so many times. It is as if the Torah is hitting you on the head with a 2x4, that the building of the tabernacle was something that 100% all of the people participated in. There was no excluded caste. And as a result of summoning all that energy, you had thriving that's unparalleled. So much so that they had more materials than they needed. And could you imagine an annual appeal or a capital campaign where the person who was trying to raise money said, you know what, you've given enough money already. This has never happened since then. Imagine, a Yom Kippur Kol Nidre appeal where the rabbi gets up and says, don't give anymore. We've got enough money. You've given us so much money. You don't need to give us anymore. And that's what happens one and only time. So let's take a look in the text. I'm going to start according to the rabbinic chronology. The sin of the golden calf happens first, and then the building of the tabernacle happens second, and it's a response, it's a remedy to the problem of the building of the golden calf. So I'm going to read it the way the rabbis read it. So you'll see what happens. I'm on page 1. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, the people gathered against Moses and said to him, come, make us a god who shall go before us. For that man Moses, who brought us from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him. Now they have stood at Sinai, and God says to Sinai, don't make any graven images, right? And what does Aaron say to them? Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. And so you learn from this that he's talking to men, right? It's raining men, right? Because he says, take off the golden rings that are on the ears of your wives. He's talking to men, because if the women were there, he would say, give me your earrings. But he doesn't say, give me your earrings. He says, take the earrings off your wives and bring them to me. So, and then all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Moses. So it was the building of the golden calf was a male production. Okay, just hold on to that. And now look on page 4. I underlined the leitmotif of every or all, okay? And you can hear it in the Hebrew and you can see it in the English, and I've underlined a lot of them. I'm on page 4. So the whole community of the Israelites left Moses' presence, and everyone who excelled in ability and everyone whose spirit moved him came, bringing to the Lord his offering for the work of the tent of meeting. Men and women, all whose heart moved them, and everyone who had in his possession blue, purple, and crimson yarn. Verse 24, everyone who could make gifts of silver and copper, and everyone who had in his possession a keiki of wood. And verse 25, and all the skilled women spun. Verse 26, and all the women who excelled in that skill spun the goat's hair. 29, thus the Israelites, all the men and women. And you see that in Hebrew with the word kol, and you can just hear it, right? Vayetzu kol adat b'nei Yisrael, vayavau kol ish asher nasa'o libo. And throughout, the word kol, all, is just said a billion times in this. One other point, if you look on page 5, in terms of caste, there's 2 people who are identified by name, who are Bezalel from the tribe of Judah, and Judah is the biggest and richest of the tribes. But he partners with Oholiab, who is from the tribe of Dan. That is the smallest and the poorest of the tribes. So this whole idea of all and everyone and men and women and everyone is then reinforced symbolically by the fact that the 2 leaders of this project come from the biggest tribe and the richest tribe and from the poorest tribe and the smallest tribe. Okay. And then finally, what you see here, look on page 6. And again, more with the every and call, ish, everyone, etc. So everybody, you just have a symphony of an entire, this is a depiction of a community that is fully mobilized. No one is excluded, everyone is included, everyone is valued, everyone is seen, and the leadership representing big and small, rich and poor says, we need you, we need all of you, we need every one of you. What can you bring? And whatever it is that you can bring, we need. Okay, what happens as a result? What happens is at the very end of the story, and again, this has happened once, it's never happened again in the history of the Jewish people, that they said to Moses, the people are bringing more than is needed for the task entailed in the work. Moses thereupon had this proclamation made throughout the camp: let no man or woman make further effort towards the gifts for the sanctuary. So that people stop bringing. So here's what the Torah reading says. And again, it's just magic. It's this week's reading, and the place that we are in the Torah now is the response. Cass says we're going to exclude some people, and as a result, our country's been tormented and not realizing its potential ever since. And our Torah reading says when you can include everyone and summon everyone, everyone wins. So since the Torah is true, and since it's obviously true, I guess my question for you is, why does that not happen in our beloved country? And what can we do about it? Love anyone who wishes to share. And I will look at other pages as well. Any ideas about why this is and what to do about it? Linda, thank you.
Well, I wouldn't have said it before reading the book by Wilkerson, but I don't know if it may not be applicable to this, but the idea that everybody needs to have someone beneath them, and they don't want everyone to be equal. That it seems like, wouldn't it be good if everyone worked together and everyone was got merit according to what they do? But that doesn't really always work in the world. And and maybe it's not relevant, maybe I'm mixing apples and oranges, but one of the things that I read that really impressed me was that, how could so many whites support Trump when all the things he promised them didn't come true? But the one thing that he did keep true was basically considering every white person who believed in him superior than people of color. And they would always have someone beneath them. And apparently that's a really strong motivation.
Yeah, and the question is, what do you do about it? What do you do about it? And it's so interesting that it seems like if you read the reviews of the administration, that the main thing that's often talked about is the tax cut, and the tax cut really did not help the poor people that voted for him. It helped the richer people, but this visceral connection with preserving caste is just so powerful that this is Dan Ariely's point. It's so important to me that I am more than you. And I think so. The question is, what do we do? How does our country deal with that? And and by the way, and again, I want to add, this is one of the learnings from the dialogue with the Western Avenue Baptist Church. It's not just MAGA supporters. And it's not just the people in, the heartland who are voting for the former president. But Jeremy said, and we had a woman as well who was raised in Cambridge and then lived in the deep South for 20 years and came back to Cambridge. She said she much prefers the South, and the South is much better for Black people because the whites in the South don't like Blacks, but they tell them so, and you know what you're dealing with. And the whites in New England don't like Blacks, but they pretend to be sanctimonious and holier than thou. And so there's this level of duplicity that is a double insult. And that the Blacks in Alabama have it much better than the Blacks in Cambridge. So again, I want to just say this is not only a MAGA issue, and it's not only the people who voted for the former president. I think this is very much our issue. Remember Jeremy's testimony that he can't walk around Cambridge. I can't walk around Newton. He lives across the street from Cabot School without worrying about getting called out by a white neighbor. The question is, what do we do about that? Judy Swartz. And please unmute, Judy.
Okay, I have to tell you, I can't even answer those questions. I am stuck on your example of the sin of the golden calf because I have a huge problem with that whole story, and I don't understand how that relates. I read so much about that they may not have been the Israelites who did this. This could be this other group who came with the Israelites through the Red Sea, blah, blah, blah. And therefore, they were like bad, sinful people to begin with because they were missing. They needed someone. They didn't think Moses was coming back. They needed someone to lead them, to guide them, all right? Not necessarily a God. And yet I totally understand that they couldn't even understand the concept, or what is this, a God that you can't see? But I don't understand how this relates to the caste problem. I don't get it.
Oh, okay, then let me try again. According to the testimony of the Torah, it was the Israelites who left Egypt who committed the sin of the golden calf. It wasn't Antifa. It wasn't some monster from outer space. It wasn't some boogeyman. The people who did the sin of the golden calf were the slaves who were redeemed from Egypt. And in fact, it was the slaves who stood at Sinai.
But were they Israelites? I read verses that said no, they weren't Israelites.
No, but it's the people. I mean, the word of the Torah is people. Vayar ha'am. It was Vayikal ha'am. It was the people, and the people is the people that just received the Torah, the people that just went through the sea of reeds. So to claim that it was Antifa or some boogeyman or some other person is just not reading the pshat of the Torah. The pshat of the Torah is that it's the same people. I'll just use the words of the Torah. The Am, Vayar ha'am. The Am or Ha'am, the nation, it's a definite article, the nation that was redeemed from Egypt, the nation that was sent through the Sea of Reeds, and the nation that stood at Sinai, built this calf. And what was particularly egregious is that, just to refresh our memory here, Exodus 20 says, "You shall have no other gods besides me. And you shall not make for yourself a sculptured image or any likeness of what is in the heavens above or on the earth below or in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am an impassioned God, visiting the sins of the parents upon the children, upon the third and the fourth generations of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the thousandth generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. So it's a pretty high order of command not to build an image and not to bow down to it and serve it. And the Israelites, according to the plain language, Judy, of the Torah, they violate that. And the question is, how did they violate that? And what I'm offering you, I think, is pshat, because you have these two building projects. You have the building of the golden calf, and you have the building of the tabernacle. And as you saw in the sections on the tabernacle, that was uber successful. They got more than they needed. And what drove that is everyone was included. And the golden calf, which was obviously a deep sin, it's clear from, again, the pshat, the language, that Aaron is doing this with just the men. Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives. So my point is that the pshat of the Torah says that when not all of a community is included, it goes badly. And when all of a community is tapped and all of a community is summoned, it goes well. And I think that's her main point in Cast. What about that is not, what does that answer your question, Judy? You're on mute, Judy. You're still on mute. Yes.
Okay, so I took a lot of Melton courses down here, and that's where I learned that it wasn't the Israelites who did that. It was this other group who came along with them. So now we've got conflicting, stories, and I'm always bothered that Aaron isn't held more responsible. I understand Aaron's role. I understand Hur was killed by the group, but when Aaron then goes on and says, "Oh, we'll have I forget what the word is. We'll have the next morning. We'll have a." I'm not looking at the text. We'll have a feast and a celebration or something. It doesn't fall for me. All right.
Well, so Judy, I'll just say one thing, and then we'll get off this. I mean, I think that I don't know what the Melton materials are that you're referring to. I'm sure there's a midrash that perhaps says that, but let me just read you from the Torah directly. I'm just reading you the language. This is while the golden calf is happening. This is how God tells Moses. I'm just quoting you the Torah. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Hurry down, for your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, have acted basely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten calf and bowed low to it and sacrificed to it, saying, 'This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.'" So I'm reading from Exodus 32, verse 7. This is God saying to Moses, your people, like, parents say to each other, it's your son, your daughter who's misbehaving, right? Your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt are doing this. So the Torah suggests explicitly that it's the same people. I'm sure there's some midrash Melton is referring to, but the pshat is that the people that were redeemed are the people who violated that first commandment. And my modest point is that when you compare that to the building of the tabernacle story, I think part of the problem is when you don't tap everybody, you get a bad result. That's okay. Annette Miller.
First of all, I think that one of the problems why people want to keep other people down in the situation of the Guatemalans is that there's a fear of scarcity. People feel there isn't enough, and so therefore they want to hold those back who can take away from them. And that goes from the people at the very top, and greed always comes into it, and they don't want someone rising up. They're not so anxious to share with everyone because it might take something from them. So a feeling of scarcity is certainly something that motivates people to want to keep other people down. That's one issue. On the issue of the golden calf, I don't get it. I understand. I mean, the golden calf. I'm curious about what you're saying, that the reason the golden calf wasn't successful, it was a bad thing, was that they didn't have everyone take the rings from your wives, but it does say here that, and all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them, etc., and they all danced. So yes, it was get the rings from your daughter. So I don't quite understand the emphasis that you're putting on the fact that not everyone took off. You had to give yours to your husbands or to the men, and they would physically build it. Where in the tabernacle, everyone put their golden threads in. They did it themselves. They not only gave and made, but they all physically built it. In this one, we're saying that the men built it, but they all gave everything. So I don't quite understand that. Therefore, we draw from that. When everyone brings everything, then we're all building and we get too much. And when just a few do it, you get a bad result. I don't know if that's the whole point, or if that's what this whole thing is really about. That if you get everyone building, it's better. And if you get just one group getting in, it's a bad result.
Yeah. So, I mean, I hear your point in that. Maybe you think that I'm trying to draw too much from this, but I want to say the following. First, all of these chapters are clustered together in the second half of the book of Exodus. So you have the same geography, the same terrain. You have a building project. They're both a building project. They're also both a building project that purports to be sacred, right? The tabernacle is where God is going to dwell among the people. And here they're building something where they can bow down and say, this is the God who took us out.
One was built out of fear.
And when you read that, the comparison of emphasis on all versus the golden calf. And here's what I want to say. I mean, yes, in the end, the women, obviously, the daughters and the wives gave the earrings. So that's true. They participated. It doesn't say that they, stole from the women in their lives. Seems like the women in their lives gave it, etc. But I would just say one thing. There is such a thing as momentum. And I think it's important. To me, one of the reads of this is that it's really important to have a diverse table when you hatch ideas, a diverse table with multiple points of view.
It was a bad idea.
And I think it was the exclusion of women who might have struck a more cautionary note that allowed this unholy momentum to take root. But if you don't like the point, it's all yours. I just think it
was my point is, it was a bad idea, is the most important thing. It was a good idea to build a tabernacle.
Right.
And it was a bad idea to have to build a God that we were told, because
Right.
because they were used to that. And it's the same reason as slaves, because they were used to being slaves. They had the first rule be, let's have slaves again now, because that was
Right.
something we're used to. And so we have the same thing here. So, oh my goodness, you know what? What is this? We better build something that we can see, because we didn't understand that you could not see something. And so that was a bad idea. I think
Yeah.
it's a big.
So I'll just leave it with this. When any organization embarks on a new move, here's a question. How do you assure that they don't do dumb stuff? How do you assure that they don't do dumb stuff and make bad mistakes? And I think one of the good ways is you have smart and diverse people. Smart and diverse people with different points of view. You have a team of rivals, so to speak, of people who see the world very differently. Because if you have just people who see the world the same, and you don't have a Dr. No around that table, you have a higher likelihood of bad outcomes. And I think if you have smart and diverse people, somebody who says, whoa, you're really off the rails here. And you have that voice, that can be a check on bad ideas happening. And you didn't have that in the Golden Calf. But I hear your point. David Kopelman.
Yes, just to come back to Linda Lefferts' point, it's a powerful emotional need, I think, to feel that you are better than another person, that your group is superior, and to push down other groups. And it reminds me of a very powerful scene in the movie Mississippi Burning, where Gene Hackman, who's an FBI agent, talks about his father, I think it was his father, who had a farm next to a black man, and the black man's farm flourished and his father's farm didn't. His father couldn't tolerate that. The next morning, the black farmer's cow was shot dead, and he knew his father had done it. It was just this need to, it's just intolerable to have a group that you may deem inferior somehow being more successful than you, which was brought out in that movie. And I wonder whether that isn't a basis of some of the popularity of Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam, to say, well, I may be a poor black man, but I'm not a Jew, I'm not a termite, I'm not the spawn of the devil. These people are a lower caste than myself, and maybe it gives them some solace. Just a thought.
Yeah, and remember 2 weeks ago, we talked about the 10th commandment of the 10 commandments, which is do not envy. And right, and all of this conversation just puts into stark relief how important that 10th commandment is, because it's not just, I want a house as big as my neighbor's. It is much deeper than that. A society can only flourish if, Gene Hackman's dad doesn't burn his neighbor's, cow. And I think being able to really get traction on not envying and realizing that we're all in this together is, I think, would be very, very helpful for the overall welfare of the society. Harriet Mazansky.
There was an article in the Sunday Times this past weekend. It was written by Heather McGee, and the title was The Economy of White Resentment. She concludes telling a story about Bridget, a white woman who she met in Kansas City, when a co-worker at Wendy's first approached her about joining a fight for the $15 group, pushing for a living minimum wage. She was skeptical. Bridget attended the first organizing meeting anyway, and when a Latina woman described her life, 3 children in a 2-bedroom apartment with bad plumbing and the feeling of being trapped, Bridget, also a mother of 3, could identify. She soon began organizing. The cross-racial movement had won a convert. For all of us to come up is not a matter of me coming up and them staying down, she said. It is a matter of, in order for me to come up, they have to come up too. She concluded, because honestly, as long as we're divided, we're conquered.
Yes. And I saw that article, Harriet, and that's a great outcome in that one case. And the question is, how can that become the national outcome? How can that become national policy? So that leads to I think we're going to have one last class on caste, which is her discussion of the election of President Obama and how his election was just a lightning rod for a lot of these issues. Because, to think that a lower caste person shouldn't rise when the lower caste person not only rises, but becomes the top, the president of the United States, that made many people feel, in the language of that book that came out in 2016, strangers in their own land. And so our last class on caste next week will be to read her treatment of the Obama election and aftermath. And the question I want to ask you to marinate on is the Harriet story, which was based on a Times article, where a white woman realizes we sink or swim together. How can her insight be shared by our nation? That we sink or swim together. How can more people get that? So we'll pick up. So our next week is our last week. If you'll read the chapters about President Obama's election and aftermath, and I again would encourage all of you and invite all of you to continue our work with the Western Avenue Baptist Church March 9th. And the 2 big critiques, we have a 500 batting average. One, I can't do anything about. Not enough Black people, that's true. Can't do anything about that. But the one about there's not enough room and time in the breakout room, that we can actually respond to. And I do promise you dramatically more time in the breakout room. And I hope that you'll reread the story that Andrea Waldstein had shared last week. It's about the heart is the last frontier, and participate in that as well. So we'll see you guys next Tuesday for our final cast conversation. Thank you so much. Bye.